Okay, today we have the Lieutenant Governor of Pennsylvania, John Fetterman. Thanks for coming on.
Thanks for having me, really.
So, John, my math might be off, but I believe you're coming to us from a state that Donald Trump has lost 8 times in the last 4 weeks so far.
That sounds low, but yeah, I'll give it to you. Yeah, no, I said the other day that if the Trump campaign doesn't stop losing, the Cleveland Browns are going to sue him for trademark infringement. I mean, and it's also funny that the Trump campaign is going to get the first round draft pick instead of the New York Jets, because they literally have a worse record than the New York Jets right now. So I don't know what their end game is. I legit don't.
I'm originally from New Jersey, so I can that Jets thing hits especially close to home, so I can appreciate that.
Well, I mean, someone has to root for him. So if you do, it's nice to finally meet one after all these years. But
oh no, I'm actually a Giants fan. I'm just saying I can appreciate it. So I have to ask first, to get this out of the way, is there any plausible way that Trump can win in Pennsylvania?
Zero, literally zero way. And I'm actually advocating that the Supreme Court take up that one case where it's like, and then they'll shoot it down unanimously, and then that would put an end to it. The Congressman Kelly case that was rejected again, and they want to again. I want to be clear. They are asking the court to throw out the entire number of ballots, and that would wipe out our entire election. In other words, nullify our election. And then they'd want the Republican legislature to appoint their own slate of electors to kind of hijack that. But they're not savvy enough to understand that if they nullify our results, we don't have a state legislature that's controlled by the Republicans to even do their bidding. So it doesn't, there's no logic to it whatsoever. I mean, at all. Like, their end game obliterates the Republican controlled legislature in our state. And 100% of our House and half of our senators are gone. And then in the Senate, that puts me in charge. I get to pick and choose when the elections are, as the president of the Senate. So I'm like, hey, if you want to do that, but I'd much rather just Joe Biden won. There was no fraud. And we just all need to get on with our lives.
So building on this lawsuit specifically, that Representative Mike Kelly brought forward, this is trying to invalidate, like you said, 2.5 million ballots. It was eventually dismissed by the Pennsylvania Supreme Court. Wasn't this law passed by the Republican Party?
Oh yeah, the law was championed by the Republican Party in Pennsylvania. It was voted unanimously. All but one state rep voted for it. Every senator voted for it. And this was like one of their signature achievements. Right. So now they wanted to turn around and claim that they and now they're damn opposed to it. And just because the president didn't like the results. It's so disingenuous, literally on every level, that the Pennsylvania GOP is suing to have the Pennsylvania GOP signature voting bill overturned that 99.8% of them voted for a year ago as unconstitutional after they authored it. So it's utterly illogical.
But this was all by design, ultimately. I mean, by virtue of the Republican legislature not allowing early ballot processing to begin until
100%,
election day,
100%.
They handed Trump the optics that he wanted, which is an election day lead that would then be quote unquote stolen from him.
Yeah, I've said this before. The president ordered up Grubhub, chaos, a big order of chaos on Grubhub, and that's what he got. He wanted that optics of, a big red surge of in-person, because voting in Pennsylvania was as predictive on party as Democrats driving Subarus and Republicans wearing Under Armour golf shirts. I mean, it's like, if you're a Democrat, mostly chance you vote by mail. And if you're a Republican, you almost the same and opposite. So they very well knew that you'd have a surge of red votes and with a big lead for the president. And then the blue wave would hit back, and they would have hit. And then depending on who had more would ultimately prevail. And they would seize on that optics and that chaos, and all they would have had to do is say, it's okay. It's okay. You could open envelopes and flatten ballots 24 hours in advance, 48 hours in advance. And we could have delivered our results in Pennsylvania the same time Florida did.
It's beyond clear that the chaos was the point here. It's not a bug, it's a feature.
That's exactly what they wanted. They wanted to create this idea that, like we were all in the background twisting our mustaches going, now we're going to rig this. Because look, he had this giant lead and then all of a sudden it evaporated. That's exactly the optics that they wanted. They wanted to have chaos because they understood and they believed that they weren't going to do particularly well. And the irony in all of this is, and I think I was the only Democrat to point this out, is that it was actually going to be a very close race. And the president actually played Pennsylvania pretty well in terms of his barnstorming and his outreach and whatever. Really energized small county Pennsylvania. So when it was as close as it was, I think they were surprised, quite frankly. And then they wanted to really maximize the chaos, like we was robbed. And when in reality, this is their law that they voted for unanimously. You can look it up online. Far more Republicans voted for this vote by mail bill than Democrats did. Virtually every Republican in Allegheny County and in Philadelphia voted against it. You can look it up. So, and then when they wouldn't allow any pre-canvassing, not even a 24-hour window, they knew exactly what they were getting, and that's exactly what they wanted.
How do Republicans justify telling voters after they voted that, on second thought, those ballots shouldn't be counted at all, even though 2.5 million Pennsylvanians cast ballots having been told it was acceptable?
I don't know. It blows my mind. And it's like, I guess they just count on if the president and Giuliani brings the whole snake handling jamboree to all these ramadas and they go like, it was fine. I got all proof, whatever, that's somehow going to carry the day. And obviously it isn't, because their record in court is worse than the New York Jets. I've never seen a group or an organization that seems to relish losing to the degree and severity they seem to, because like these suits aren't dismissed, they're ridiculed. I mean, they're like booted out of court. And I don't understand it. And then also there was this movement by a small group of legislators saying, well, we're going to call up a resolution or whatever. I'm like, great, dude. I could have a resolution where I could want to rename our bird from the ruffed grouse to a ham sandwich. So I just don't understand it. There's no legitimacy to it whatsoever.
I believe, was that State Senator Doug Mastriano?
Yes, that's Doug Mastriano, who's a colleague of mine in the Senate. But even, he knows better than anybody that was just empty symbolism, that was
didn't he call that resolution?
Even call a session for it. It was just to get himself, like, if you look at his Twitter numbers, he went from 6,500 Twitter followers to like 180,000 Twitter followers, because
that's what it's all about.
It created this, like, what a great American, when like, no, he's lying to you. And no one knows that better than he does, that he's being disingenuous. He knew that there was no chance that was going anywhere. And it's one thing to say, well, I think Donald Trump should have won. That's fine. But to pretend that somehow you are going to introduce a resolution when our legislative session is over and that you have less than a third of the Republicans on board and the leadership hasn't even scheduled a session. I mean, like, other than lying, I don't know what else to call it.
So the question becomes, like, in Pennsylvania, do you think there's going to be pushback against the Republicans who did this, or is that just what the GOP has become and this was baked into the cake already?
I mean, I think it's what it's become in many respects. And let me be clear, I admire, or at least appreciate, the way Republican leadership in like the House and Senate has behaved during this election. I gotta give them to some degree of credit, because they have to pander. I mean, it's a reality. You have to pander to the snake handling and the crazy wing of their party, because they're very vocal and they're very active. But they know better than anybody too that this was a free, fair election and that Joe Biden won. So they have to kind of walk that line between like, this is nonsense and this is absurd, versus, like putting out a resolution like my colleague about how we need to, appoint our own slate of electors. So they walk that line, and they never cater to that lunatic fringe part of the party that's calling for the legislature to appoint their own set of electors.
I'd be remiss if I didn't ask about this because it's the biggest story of the week. So, could you give me your thoughts on the CIA, the DOJ, Republican governors and secretaries of state, China, Cuba, Venezuela, and Hugo Chavez, who died in 2013 conspiring to steal the election from Trump?
Yeah, I mean, I feel like I feel like that could have legs. I really do.
Yeah.
And I got to tell you, they're really on to something. No, it's just, I just wish and this is what I try to do in my own social media on my Twitter, is just try to communicate how ridiculous it is. Like this morning, there was a clip of on Hannity where Sean Hannity's going, well, yeah, we got Georgia, we have Nevada, that falls, and then we could do Pennsylvania, and Giuliani's like, yeah, it's great. I mean, and then I put the clip from Airplane where Lloyd Bridges is like sniffing glue. I mean, I don't know how else to point out how absurd it is. Then this idea that they're actively lying. I mean, these are not individuals that believe what they're saying, and that's what just, in my estimation, makes it that much more reckless and insidious, is that they're deliberately manufacturing misinformation. They know that it's going to have a divisive and harmful and caustic effect on our franchise here in this country. And they continue to pump it out, and they are indifferent to the damage that they're causing, because nobody knows better than they do that it's all bullshit.
Yeah. And by the way, what they have been able to accomplish throughout all of this is that when we see these fundraising numbers from upwards of $200 million, well, then suddenly it makes sense,
Yeah. And I've been saying this from the get-go. The president is going to run for another term. I guarantee you. It's just a matter of time before he announces he's running on 24. And I'm sure he'll do whatever he can to mar or diminish, Joe Biden's inauguration day with some major announcement or something. I don't know. I mean, he is very much still the owner of one of the biggest microphones in the world. He's not going to walk away from that. And he's going to use that to extract retribution on brave, I got to say, brave members of the GOP that, like in Arizona or in elsewhere, they're like, no, this was a fair election. Just in my state of Pennsylvania, Al Schmidt, the commissioner in Philadelphia, he could have been National Republican Hero of the Month if he was willing to play that game. Instead, he said, no, this is fair. This is free. And they had to assign him security because he was having death threats. So, I mean, think of the character it takes to pick, well, I could get 200,000 new Twitter followers, or I could get death threats. I mean, to conscientiously choose that, I think that really speaks to someone's character.
Totally. I mean, you have, guys like Gabriel Sterling, like Raffensperger in Georgia, and then you have the Mastrianos in the world who, hope he enjoys his 100,000 more Twitter followers. And that's the difference,
They're monetizing their character in terms of Twitter followers for their own political gain. Because I want to be clear, there is no scenario or no set of facts or allegations that anyone could reasonably base the thought that anyone other than Joe Biden won this race. They know that. They know that better than anybody. What they are trying to do is turn these bizarre anecdotes, and my cousin's brother's girlfriend read on Facebook, I signed, I would literally sit here with a thumb drive and say, you know what? Someone sent this to me. They found it in a Waffle House bathroom stall in Austin, Texas. And it's got 1 million votes for Joe Biden. So we have grounds to, overturn Texas now. I mean, it's that absurd.
I do want to do a bit of an autopsy on the November 3rd election. And I know every state is different, but in a state like Pennsylvania, where the GOP still has a majority in the state legislature, what needs to be done to win over these voters? Yeah.
Well, what we need to do is we have to ungerrymander our state and House, our House and Senate districts in the PA legislature. And we would get a more true, but just like we did with our congressional races, we went from 13 and 5 to 9 and 9 after we ungerrymandered them, which is exactly where we should be. Pennsylvania is a very purple state. I don't care. Conventional wisdom was, oh, it's a blue state now. I'm like, no, it never was, So we're very purple. So if we ungerrymandered that, I think we would get a much more honest take on where we are as a state. And what we need to do going forward with all of this is, you can't, I'm trying to find the right term, but you can't like bring someone into the fold if they are unwilling to acknowledge basic facts. Like you and I wouldn't be arguing over 1 + 1 = 3. Like the way Twitter labels things where it's like, it's in dispute. I'm like, no, it's not a dispute. I'm wearing a black shirt is a fact. It's not, well, it's in dispute. So this idea that you can take a fact that we all have to acknowledge is true and then somehow both sides it's dangerous. And that's where we are on our social media platform, where the president gets away with saying something that he knows is a lie. And then they have to slap it's in dispute. I'm like, no, the dude's lying.
What issues do we need to focus on in a state that looks like Pennsylvania, for example? I know that you specifically have been vocal about legalizing marijuana, which personally, I think should be one of the top 3 issues that we're talking about every day, because it's an issue that offers rare instant gratification.
Totally. That's absolutely wonderful. But I think even more important than that is our minimum wage. It's a disgrace. Our minimum wage in Pennsylvania is the federal minimum wage is $7.25 an hour.
Yeah.
And it's a fucking disgrace. And Florida, for example, voted for a $15 an hour minimum wage. And if you're to the right or you're behind Florida on anything, that should be a wake-up call. Yeah. And you brought up weed. So let's look at who we are to the right of. We're to the right of South Dakota. We're to the right of Arizona. We're to the right of Montana. In Arizona now, you can grow 12 weed plants in your home, up to 12. In Pennsylvania, your ass is going to jail for at least 2 years, and you're a convicted felon if you do that. What's wrong with us as a state where, like, this idea that, and another thing is investing in our infrastructures. We have such an unmet need for a lot of these, and the revenue that we could generate is astounding with marijuana. Yeah. And then also our state inmate population. We have more lifers in our jail cells in Pennsylvania than everyone except Florida. And our Secretary of Corrections had said, we were in a conference together on a panel. He said we could release a third of our inmates and not make anyone less safe. And that would translate into at least $1 billion a year in savings that we could reinvest in our education and our infrastructures and our, you name it. Because right now we're investing it in warehousing people. That's not making anybody any safer. And that's actually having a very damaging effect on the families and the communities that a lot of these people that don't even belong in prison come from.
So how do we get something like this onto the ballot in a state like Pennsylvania?
Yeah. Well, it's going to require to keep pushing, because these ideas are truths. They're not my opinions. They're truths. And the truth of the matter is, you can't even pay for food for a family of 4 for a month, $7.25 an hour. The truth is, we have a thriving weed market in Pennsylvania already. It's just the black market, and the cartels and the dealers are getting all the money instead of we are. Why not monetize it? Why not legalize it? Why not, make it a just transaction and a safe and a pure transaction? And then finally, our inmate population, our numbers are staggering. We have a figure where that houses the infirm and the elderly. Half those inmates are testing positive for COVID. Why are we warehousing people that need a walker to even get around? What kind of crime can they commit? Why can't that be bipartisan? Why are we even arguing about these truths? They're just truths. And if you're all good with buying a bottle of Jack Daniels and a carton of cigarettes and going to gamble your life savings away at one of the state casinos, why is sipping a little weed somehow make you a criminal? These things aren't. It's not an. I don't know why we argue about them. I really don't. These are self-evident truths.
In a state like PA, is it possible to get this on a ballot, like in a referendum, as a referendum?
Unfortunately, unfortunately, ballot referendums like that are not permitted under our Constitution. I went around to all 67 counties in Pennsylvania, and I said, 18 months ago that at least 65, no more than 70, somewhere in that mid to upper 60s range of our residents want legal weed. And it turns out that's exactly where it was. And at first, the GOP was like, "Oh, he's lying. Oh, he's cooking the numbers." And now they've stopped saying that because everybody knows it's true. I said this during the election. Whichever campaign or candidate embraces legal weed, that's the one that's going to win. If Donald Trump would have said, "You know what, in September, we're going to legalize weed at a federal level and we're going to push for pardons and whatever," I guarantee he would have won. Because you look how close the race was. You're telling me that a couple 100,000 votes spread across a few states, that wouldn't have energized people, that wouldn't have electrified a lot. And I think it would have been critical. We just need to acknowledge the truths and stop turning them into arguments between Republicans and Democrats. We'll always have things that we can argue about, but for this country to heal and move together, I'm hoping we can put a lot of these in a basket of things where we really don't need to argue about, and we just really need to figure out how we get it done.
Yeah, it's well said. Well, I do have one last question, and that is,
Sure.
you've talked a lot of trash on Wawa, but my question is,
no. Let's talk about the truth again. I'm about talking truth here. So Wawa is a great option if you're 50 miles or more from a Sheetz, and then you have no excuse. But yeah, so yes.
Well, my question, John, is have you ever even had a Wawa brand orange drink with all of its 775 grams of sugar at 3 o'clock in the morning?
Oh, the orange drink. I've had the Sizzlies. I've had their coffee, and again, it's great. But if you're not willing to drive 50 miles for that Sheetz, then I have to question your judgment. But there are places in Pennsylvania where you're like, it's just not practical to get to a Sheetz, so you're going to choose Wawa. And I just want you to know that's okay. But I also call Wawa fans, they're Pennsylvania residents that were unlucky enough to never have been to a Sheetz yet. So there's always time for growth, and that's what I hope. And I also want to remind folks too that the Steelers are 11-0, and the Eagles aren't. And even as a Giants fan, I don't think I have any ground to stand on if I'm going to be defending the NFC East today. 2020, I don't think anyone's had a great 20, but at least the Steelers are undefeated. So at that point, that's a source of pride. And I also think it's important that we tell the truth. There are people that I'm rooting for the Steelers and the Eagles if they're, statewide official. And I'm like, no, it's the Steelers and it's Sheetz and it's Yins, not you. And let the chips fall where they may here in Pennsylvania. So.
All right. Well, John, thanks so much for taking the time. I really appreciate it.
Yeah. Hey, thanks for having me on. Really, truly big fan.